Hello everyone. Today we will discuss portal hypertension. Why portal hypertension is important for us? Because portal hypertension is one of the commonest cause of upper gastrointestinal bleeding in children or hematemesis in children. Before going into details of portal hypertension, do you know about the portal venous system? In the circulatory system, a portal venous system occurs when a capillary bed pulls into the another capillary bed through vein without first going through the heart. They are relatively uncommon as the majority of capillary bed drains into the vein which then drain into the heart. Portal venous system are considered venous because the blood vessels that join the two capillary bed are either veins or venules. The functional significance of such a system is that it transports products of one region directly to the another region in relatively high concentration. If the heart were involved in the blood circulation between these two regions, these products would be spread around the rest of the body. Examples of portal venous system in human body are hepatic portal system and the hypophyseal portal system. We will discuss hepatic portal system in detail. In the hypophyseal portal system, there is capillary bed from hypothalamus drains into the capillary bed of the anterior pituitary. So the releasing hormones from the hypothalamus drain into the anterior pituitary. In human anatomy, the hepatic portal system is the system of veins comprising the hepatic portal vein and its tributaries. It is also called the portal venous system, although it is not the only example of a portal venous system, as we have discussed in our earlier slides. The portal vein is formed in front of inferior vena cava and behind the neck of the pancreas at the level of second lumbar vertebra. Portal vein is formed by the union of splenic vein and the superior mesenteric vein. It is 7 to 8 cm in length and it contains no valves as compared to the other veins. Then it courses in the lesser omentum posterior to the both common hepatic artery and the common bile duct to reach the porta hepatis, that is the entry point into the liver. Immediately before reaching the liver, the portal vein divides into right and left trunk at porta hepatis. It ramifies further, forming smaller venous branches and ultimately portal venules. Each portal venules courses alongside a hepatic arteriole and the two vessels form the vascular component of the portal triad. These vessels ultimately empty into the hepatic sinusoids to supply blood to the liver. So, around 80% of the blood supply to the liver is carried by the portal vein and only 20% of the blood is carried through the hepatic artery. So, the entire blood from the gastrointestinal system is first carried to the liver through the portal vein before reaching to the heart. What are the main tributaries of the portal vein are the coronary vein, that is also left gastric vein, pyloric vein, cystic vein, pancreatico-duodenal vein, umbilical vein, and the ligamentum venosum. You already know ductus venosus, which converts into the ligamentum venosum. What is the physiological significance of the portal venous system. In carrying venous blood from the gastrointestinal tract to the liver, the portal vein accomplishes two tasks. It supplies the liver with metabolic substrate and it ensures that the substance ingested are first processed by the liver before reaching the systemic circulation. This accomplishes two things. First, possible toxins that may be ingested can be detoxified by the hepatocytes before they are released into the systemic circulation. Second, the liver is the first organ to absorb nutrients just taken in by the intestine. After draining into the liver sinusoids, blood from the liver is drained by the hepatic vein and then into the inferior vena cava, and ultimately it reaches to the heart for systemic distribution. In this picture you can see portal vein is formed by the joining of splenic vein and the superior mesenteric vein. Inferior mesenteric vein sometimes opens into the splenic vein and sometimes it opens into the superior mesenteric vein. You can also see the other tributaries of the portal vein. So you already know the portal venous system, how it carries blood and how it drains blood. The normal portal venous pressure is 5 to 7 millimeter of mercury, that is around 8 to 12 centimeter of water, because mercury is 13 times heavier than the water. Portal hypertension is said to be present when the portal vein pressure is more than 12 millimeter of mercury. There is no method to directly measure the portal venous pressures. These are measured indirectly by using ultrasonography and the clinical signs and symptoms of the portal hypertension. Direct measurement of the portal venous pressure only can be done by the invasive procedure, that is too risky. Since portal venous system is a low pressure circuit, most of the time it is increased resistance or obstruction in the blood flow inside portal venous system that causes portal hypertension. Rarely there are some conditions in which increased blood flow leads to the portal hypertension. So increased resistance to the flow can be divided into three categories depending upon their location at the portal venous system. First is prehepatic, means the obstruction is below the level of liver. Second is hepatic, means the obstruction is at the level of hepatic sinusoids. And third is posthepatic, means obstruction is after the liver, means the blood draining from the liver where there is obstruction. So the causes of prehepatic portal venous obstruction are congenital atresia or stenosis of the portal vein, thrombosis of the portal vein. This is one of the important cause of portal hypertension in infants and the children. And the cause of portal venous thrombosis is in infants are umbilical sepsis, umbilical venous catheterization, whereas in older children and adults there are some thrombophilias which can lead to the portal hypertension. You all know about thrombophilias like factor V Leiden mutation, protein C and protein C deficiency, antithrombin deficiency, antiphospholipid antibody syndrome, then thrombosis of splenic vein, or the extensive compression by the tumors. Then intrahepatic causes of portal hypertension, liver cirrhosis. This is the most important cause of portal hypertension in adults. In liver cirrhosis, there is disturbed architecture of the sinusoids along with portal fibrosis. This leads to the increased resistance to the portal vein. Obstruction in the liver cirrhosis is both at the level of sinusoids and the post-sinusoidal. Second cause of intrahepatic portal hypertension is parasitic infestation by the bilharzial or schistosomiasis. This is only one condition in which obstruction is pre-sinusoidal but it is intrahepatic. This is one of the important pre-PG questions for you people. Note this: schistosomiasis. In schistosomiasis, portal hypertension is pre-sinusoidal but intrahepatic. The causes of portal hypertension in cirrhotic patients are diminution of the total vascular bed by obliteration, distortion and compression of sinusoids, compression of the tiny radicals by portal and hepatic veins by excessive fibrosis, and the development of multiple arteriovenous shunt between the branches of the hepatic artery and portal vein. Good morning. Post-hepatic causes of portal hypertension are Budd-Chiari syndrome, in which there is thrombosis of hepatic vein and sometimes it extends to the inferior vena cava. The prominent feature of Budd-Chiari syndrome is massive ascites, massive hepatomegaly and abdominal pain. Causes of Budd-Chiari syndrome, as you may have learnt in your pathology classes, these are the thrombophilic conditions like 4P, which increases the chances of thrombosis in the vein. These 4P are pregnancy, pills, that is oral contraceptive pills, polycythemia and protein C and protein S deficiency. Other causes of post-hepatic portal hypertension are veno-occlusive diseases and sometimes cardiac diseases may lead to post-hepatic portal hypertension. These are the cardiac pathology which increases pressure on the right side of the heart, thereby transmitting increased venous pressure to the inferior vena cava and then to the hepatic vein and finally to the portal vein. These cardiac conditions are constrictive pericarditis. This condition usually follows a purulent pericardial effusion. Second is valvular heart disease, in which there is tricuspid regurgitation and pulmonary regurgitation, and in some cases of right-sided heart failure. Some rare causes of portal hypertension are because of increased portal blood flow. In these conditions, there is no obstruction in the portal venous system, but since there is increased portal blood flow, pressure inside the portal venous system increases and this leads to the portal hypertension. One cause of increased portal blood flow is arterial portal venous fistula, and other causes in which there is increased splenic flow are Banti's syndrome and huge splenomegaly that can happen in cases of tropical splenomegaly and hematological diseases like chronic myeloid leukemia, and other rare causes are acute leukemias, acute lymphocytic leukemia and acute myeloid leukemia. So most important cause of hematological disorders that give rise to massive splenomegaly is chronic myeloid leukemia. So what are the consequences of portal hypertension that leads to its clinical presentation? So this sequelae results in different symptoms and signs of the portal hypertension. First and foremost thing is opening of the portosystemic collaterals. These are also known as portocaval anastomosis. This is the collateral communication between the portal and the systemic venous system. The portal venous system transmits deoxygenated blood from most of the gastrointestinal tract and gastrointestinal organs to the liver. But when there is blockage of the portal system, portocaval anastomosis enable the blood to still reach the systemic venous circulation. Even though this is useful, bypassing the liver may be dangerous since it is the main organ in charge for detoxification and breaking down of substances found in the gastrointestinal tract such as medications as well as poisons. In normal condition, these anastomotic sites are collapsed, but whenever there is portal hypertension, they got engorged and divert blood away from the portal circulation to the systemic circulation. This site at the lower end of esophagus, tributaries of the left gastric vein joins the tributaries of the hemiazygous vein. Left gastric vein represents the portal venous system, while the hemiazygous vein represents the systemic venous system. Around the umbilicus, para-umbilical vein joins the superior and inferior epigastric veins. At the lower end of the gastrointestinal tract, in rectum and anal canal, superior rectal vein joins the middle and inferior rectal vein. So this gives rise to the hemorrhoids. While at the lower end of the esophagus and the stomach, there is formation of the esophageal and gastric varices because of portal hypertension. In the umbilicus, one can find caput medusa. That is typical signs of the portal hypertension. At the back of colon, right and left colic veins join the right and left renal veins, and in the retroperitoneum, tributaries of the superior and inferior mesenteric veins joins the posterior abdominal and subdiaphragmatic veins. As you can see in this photograph, important sites of portocaval anastomosis. At the lower end of the esophagus and the upper part of the stomach, because of portal hypertension, there is engorgement of the venules that gives rise to esophageal and gastric varices. These varices, when ruptured, lead to hematemesis and upper GI bleeding. In the lower gastrointestinal tract, there are formation of hemorrhoids. Splenomegaly, this is the most constant physical finding. It is said that in pediatrics, whenever there is upper GI bleeding along with splenomegaly, it is portal hypertension until proven otherwise. In 80% of the patients, it is present regardless of the cause of the portal hypertension. So in 80% of patients, whether it is prehepatic, hepatic or post-hepatic, splenomegaly is present. In schistosomiasis, it is because of the reticuloendothelial hyperplasia due to absorption of bilharzial toxins, and later on with the progression of portal hypertension, it is due to congestion. So palpation of spleen is very important clinical finding in cases of portal hypertension. So you must look for spleen in cases of hematemesis. Then there is congestion of the whole gastrointestinal tract. Because of portal hypertension, venules and capillary bed are congested. This congestion leads to anorexia, dyspepsia, acid peptic disorders, indigestion and malabsorption. Bleeding varices, we have discussed about it in our previous slides. Then another important finding in portal hypertension is ascites. So presence of ascites is one of the important marker to differentiate between the prehepatic and hepatic and post-hepatic portal hypertension. In prehepatic portal hypertension, ascites is seldom present, while in post-hepatic portal hypertension, ascites is always present. In some cases of hepatic portal hypertension, ascites may be present. So the causes of ascites in portal hypertension is multifactorial in nature. One is hypoalbuminemia. You all know albumin is responsible for the oncotic pressure of the blood. So whenever there is decrease in the level of albumin, there will simultaneously fall in the oncotic pressure of the blood, while the hydrostatic pressure remains the same. This leads to the formation of transduit in the peritoneal cavity. Then there is salt and water retention because of hypovolemia. This hypovolemia results in secretion of aldosterone, estrogens and other antidiuretic hormones. And third cause is increased lymphatic transduction from the liver. So ascites is one of the important clinical marker to differentiate between the prehepatic and post-hepatic causes of portal hypertension. Investigation in portal hypertension starts from routine investigation, complete blood count, which may show anemia because of repeated bleeding from the upper and lower gastrointestinal tract. Then disturbed liver function test, hypoalbuminemia, because liver is the only site of albumin synthesis. Liver enzymes are raised. They depends upon the causes of the hepatitis, and prothrombin time and concentration are disturbed. You all know that prothrombin time is assessed to check the integrity of the extrinsic pathway, and factor 7 is present in the extrinsic coagulatory pathway. Half-life of the factor 7 is the shortest among all the clotting factors. So whenever there is hepatic dysfunctions, prothrombin time is the first to increase. So this is the most sensitive indicator of the liver function, and it must be assessed in all cases of hepatitis. Esophageal varices can be directly seen by using fiber optic upper GI endoscopy. Indirectly, it can be delineated by barium swallow, which can visualize varices in 90% of the cases. They appear like honeycombs in which there are multiple smooth, rounded filling defects are seen in the X-ray, and duplex scan can also show dilated portal vein and the collaterals. With the help of ultrasound, vascular anatomy of the portal venous system can be seen. Block in the portal splenic or hepatic vein can be directly seen. Pulsatility and the size of the portal vein can be measured. Presence of thrombus, VAC, membrane or atresia can be seen. and presence of collaterals, ascites, splenomegaly, architecture of the liver, nodules in the liver, any mass that is compressing the portal or splenic vein, they can all be directly seen by using ultrasound. In this barium X-ray, that is barium swallow, you can see the honeycomb appearance. There are round filling defects that are multiple in number and smooth in margin. While with the use of upper GI endoscopy, you can see the smooth mucosa of the esophageum is replaced by esophageal varices. There are multiple tubercles like structures that are present in the lower part of the esophagus. In hepatic type of portal hypertension, in addition to management of portal hypertension, one need to establish the diagnosis of liver disease. Usually it is the end stage liver disease or liver cirrhosis that give rise to portal hypertension. So any of the conditions that can lead to liver cirrhosis can complicate portal hypertension. For hepatitis, there are different markers. Like in viral hepatitis, antibodies against different hepatitis virus like A, B, C, D and E can be assessed in the blood. While in cases of autoimmune hepatitis, anti-LKM antibodies and other anti-nuclear antibodies can be found. Many times with the help of blood investigation, liver pathology could not be ascertained. In these cases, liver biopsy is necessary, and liver biopsy can be done only after correction of coagulopathy. Liver biopsy give exact idea about the destruction of hepatocytes, bridging necrosis, portal fibrosis, and deposition of additional substance like iron, copper, amyloid or other storage disorders. Patients with portal hypertension may bleed huge amount of blood, so they are at risk of hypovolemia and shock. So any patient who are coming with active bleeding or hematemesis should be admitted in the hospital for resuscitation. A wide bore cannula is inserted and blood samples should be taken for preliminary investigation. Our main aim should be prevention and treatment of hypovolemia and shock, because this can be life threatening. So restoration of blood volume should be rapid, but one must ensure that hypervolemia or volume overload should be avoided, because this can further lead to hematemesis. Morphine and pethidine for sedation are contraindicated. These patients may also have coagulopathy because of hepatic dysfunction. So to prevent coagulopathy and to correct coagulopathy, vitamin K is given intravenously. Many patients may need other form of replacement of coagulation factors like fresh frozen plasma and cryoprecipitate. Another important complication of portal hypertension is encephalopathy, particularly those with hepatic dysfunctions. Blood that is come from the esophageal varices. Some amount of blood goes into the intestine. There it will be fermented to ammonia and other nitrogenous products by intestinal bacteria. This ammonia is responsible for the encephalopathy. So that is a very dangerous complication of liver failure and portal hypertension. So to prevent encephalopathy, repeated enemas are given to clear the stool and to clear the bacteria. Oral lactulose can be given, which is a disaccharide sugar. It is fermented by intestinal flora to the lactic acid, and that lactic acid combines with the anemia. Oral lactulose also causes diarrhea, thereby removing the excess nitrogenous products from the intestine. Neomycin can be given every 4 hours to reduce the intestinal bacterial flora. Definitive treatment of bleeding esophageal varices are sclerotherapy or esophageal band ligation. In sclerotherapy, with the help of endoscope, 1 to 3 ml of sclerosing agent like ethanolamine oleate is ingested into the Engos venules. It may require multiple sessions. It controls bleeding in 80 to 95% of cases. Around 50% there is chances of rebleeding within next 2 to 3 weeks. But the complication rate of sclerotherapy is higher. So it is not considered as a gold standard for the treatment of bleeding esophageal varices. The most important complication of sclerotherapy is esophageal stricture because it causes inflammation of the esophagus. In this picture you can see endoscopic sclerotherapy. There are two positions of the endoscopic sclerotherapy. One is intravesical and another is paravaricial. In intravesical, sclerosant is directly injected into the Engos venules, while in paravaricial, sclerosant is ingested away from the Engos venules. Endoscopic variceal sclerotherapy involves the use of a flexible fiber optic endoscope to inject one of the several sclerosing agents directly into the esophageal varices. The sclerosant thromboses the varices both by inducing the injury to the cells of the vascular endothelium and by direct activation of the clotting mechanism. Repeated sclerotherapy obliterates the varices, reducing the risk of rebleeding. In addition to the expected thrombosis, there is also superficial and deep necrosis of the esophageal wall and substantial inflammation of the esophagus and periesophageal tissue. This inflammation often causes esophageal ulceration, mediastinitis, pleuritis, rarely esophageal perforation, mediastinal infections and empyema can also occur. So in systemic complications, there may be fever, pneumonitis, pleural effusion, and in some cases there can be encephalopathy may occur after session of sclerotherapy. Hence, the gold standard for treatment of bleeding esophageal varices is endoscopic banding, in which a band or a cap is used to occlude the venous channels. Endoscopic banding is better than the endoscopic sclerotherapy, as there is less number of sessions are required as compared to sclerotherapy, and the results are similar to the sclerotherapy. Chances of complications are much less in cases of endoscopic banding because in endoscopic banding there is no inflammation, and this is the endoscopic treatment of choice for bleeding esophageal varices. As you can see in this photograph, with the help of endoscope, A rubber band is applied over the esophageal varices. This process is usually repeated at 2 weeks interval until all the varices are obliterated, and this is usually achieved in 90% of the patients after 2 to 4 sessions. Variceal recurrence is frequent, and around 20 to 75% of patients require repeated endoscopic band ligation. With the use of other pharmacological drugs, recurrence of the varices can be lowered down. Complications is iatrogenic perforation of the esophagus. There are few drugs available to check bleeding from the esophageal varices. One of the important drugs is vasopressin. Vasopressin is a potent vasoconstrictor of the splanchnic circulation. It is given in the form of continuous infusion. Dose is 0.2 unit per kg weight, dissolved in 200 ml of 5% dextrose over 20 minutes, followed by continuous infusion. Complication of vasopressin are colicky abdominal pain and diarrhea, anginal pain, so it is contraindicated in elderly. It reduces bleeding in about 80% of the cases. To prolong its action, it is combined with glycine, that is also known as glypressin. Another drug that decreases esophageal bleeding is somatostatin or octreotide. It lowers the intravaricial pressures without significant side effects, but it is costly than the vasopressin. Dose is initial bolus of 100 microgram followed by continuous infusion of 20 microgram per hour for 24 hours. Another drug that decreases the risk of bleeding from esophageal varices is propranolol, but propranolol is not given in acute hematemesis. Propranolol on long-term use decreases bleeding by decreasing the cardiac output. The dose is 5 to 10 milligram per kg per day in 2 divided doses. It decreases the heart rate by 25% and it reduces 40% of the bleeding episodes. But propranolol can be used as a prophylaxis to prevent the bleeding from esophageal varices. In acute hematemesis or in acute bleeding episode, there is no role of propranolol. Other method to prevent bleeding from or to stop bleeding from esophageal varices is balloon tamponade by Sangstetten, Blackmore or Linton tube. This technique is obsolete now. In this technique, a gastric balloon is inserted and it is first inflated with 200 ml of air. Then it is pulled upwards to press the gastric fundus. If bleeding continues, then the esophageal balloon is inflated. The pressure in the esophageal balloon should not exceed 40 mm of mercury. This therapy is effective in controlling bleeding in 80 to 90% of cases. But there are chances of ischemia and necrosis of the esophageal wall, and there are risks of esophageal perforation. This technique is obsolete nowadays because with the use of endoscopy, better control of the bleeding from the esophageal varices can be achieved. Disadvantages of balloon tamponade is discomfort to the patient. The patient cannot swallow his saliva. There is risk of esophageal ulceration, stricture and perforation. And once the tube is deflated, there is risk of rebleeding in 60 to 80% of the patient. So, balloon tamponade is used in emergency cases as a temporary measure before sclerotherapy or esophageal band ligation or surgery. In this picture you can see Sangstetten Blackmore tube, and there is two balloon. One is esophageal balloon and other is gastric balloon. First gastric balloon is inflated, and then later on, if bleeding is persists, then esophageal balloon is inflated. Transjugular intrahepatic portosystemic shunt. This is one of the promising non-invasive treatment for refractory bleeding. Transjugular intrahepatic portosystemic shunt, in short form known as TIPS, is an artificial channel within the liver that establishes communication between the inflow portal vein and the outflow hepatic vein. It is used to treat portal hypertension, which is often due to liver disease or liver cirrhosis, which frequently leads to intestinal bleeding, life-threatening esophageal bleeding, and ascites. In TIPS, an interventional radiologist creates the shunt using an image-guided endovascular approach with the jugular vein as the usual entry site. That's why it is known as transjugular. The procedure is carried out inside the liver parenchyma. Hence, it is known as intrahepatic. TIPS is a life-saving procedure in bleeding from esophageal or gastric varices. It has shown some promise for people with hepatorenal syndrome, and it may also help in refractory ascites. Complications of TIPS are: patient may experience transient post-operative hepatic encephalopathy. There is risk of rupture of liver parenchyma with massive hemorrhage, and sometimes the shunt may get blocked. Indication for TIPS are refractory bleeding prior to transplant, liver transplant, those who comes in child pug classification category C, and refractory ascites. Main early complication of TIPS, as we have already know, perforation of liver capsule with massive hemorrhage. Surgical treatment for portal hypertension is shunt operation. Shunt operations are done with the idea to lower the portal pressure by shunting the portal blood away from the liver. So effectively it is portal decompression. It is indicated in patients who have portal hypertension refractory to treatment by medical therapies. There are different shunts, collateral shunts, in which portal vein is anastomosed to the systemic veins. Portocaval operations. There are two types of portocaval operation. One is end to side and another is side to side. In portocaval operation, portal vein is anastomosed to the inferior vena cava. In end to side portocaval operation, portal vein is dissected and whole of the portal vein is connected to the inferior vena cava. While in side to side anastomosis, which is preferred, only side of the portal vein is anastomosed to the inferior vena cava. Portocaval operation is very efficient in lowering the portal pressure, and there is no further bleeding from the esophageal varices. However, there is risk of hepatic encephalopathy in these patients. Also, portocaval operation accelerates the onset of liver failure. In proximal splenorenal shunt, splenic vein is divided at the splenic end and it is connected to the left renal vein. It is indicated if the portal vein is thrombosed or if splenectomy is indicated due to hypersplenism. The incidence of hepatic encephalopathy is less than after porta-caval shunt. However, it is less effective in preventing further bleeding. If the size of splenic vein is less than 1 cm, then there are likelihood of splenic vein thrombosis. Ultimately, if there is advanced liver failure, liver transplant is the only option. It can improve overall health and remove the other complications of the portal hypertension. Liver transplant is indicated only in hepatic type of portal hypertension, in which there is complete hepatic failure. Thank you.